I've been. Dreams are seeds we plant, my friend. Dusty boots, but a heart of gold. Your story's waiting to be told. Inventive journey, here we go. Through highs and lows, we let it flow. Startups rising, small but shine. Your time is now, your stars align. Cowbell ring and feel the beat. Hustle hard, don't take a seat.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Jeremy Ames. And Jeremy started his journey and wanted to go to school to be a teacher. Got into student teaching in college and hated it and decided to drop out or go a different direction. Went to work for a restaurant and ended up working his way up to opening a number of restaurants, and was working for a manager, and boss pulled him aside and told him that he was making everybody look bad and was a bit arrogant, and with that put in 2 weeks notice and or decided to shift directions and went and got a real estate license, and did that with an investment group and got some guidance there, even though that investment group long term didn't necessarily work out well, but worked out for him, and saw an opportunity, started his own thing, and shifted a few things along the way to putting in more of a focus on doing retirement or utilizing retirement counts within the real estate industry. So with that, is that as much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Jeremy.
Hi, Devin. How are you?
I'm doing well and excited to have you here. So looking forward to a good episode. But yeah, so with that, I just gave the quick overview to a much longer journey. So why don't we rewind and unpack that a bit? And with that, tell us a little bit about how your journey got started going off to college, wanting to be a teacher.
Well, I don't know that I would say I really wanted to be a teacher as much as that was the thing that I saw that I thought I could do. I don't know about you, Devin, but I didn't grow up with a lot of people around me. My parents weren't talking to me about which college I was going to go to or what I wanted to do with my life. And I don't think I didn't even take my ACT test until the second half of my senior year. So I didn't even apply. I applied to one college, and it only happened like at the very end of the year when I found out a couple of my buddies were going to a school in Idaho. And I was like, well, I guess I'll go there. And I guess I'll study to be a teacher because I've, been in school for 12 years, and that seems like something I could do. But turns out I wasn't really that passionate about it. And I got to my junior year and I was racking up the student debt, and I did the student teaching, and I thought to myself, oh, I don't like this. Maybe I should stop racking up this debt for something that I don't love. And so I left and got a job, probably like a lot of people. And
what was it along the way of getting into kind of student teaching that that's a good ways in? Usually you've already gone through a lot of the classes, done quite a bit of the work, and so what was it? Hey, I found that I hated kids, and I'm not saying you hate kids or don't want to didn't want. I mean, I have 4 kids, and if I had to, I wouldn't want to be a teacher because managing a large amount of kids would just be a nightmare for me, even though I love my kids or help them with their homework every night. But there's a difference. It can be hating the setup of or having to manage a whole bunch of kids. It can be not liking the bureaucracy of being a teacher. It can be not liking the subject or the structure. So what was it kind of as you got into student teaching that kind of said, nah, I want to go in a different direction?
it was different than I was expecting. I was expecting it was going to be you're sort of molding young minds, and it was a lot more like behavioral management and then just, having to spend so much time on lesson planning and structure. So I felt I was sort of vacillating between babysitting and, doing paperwork, and I just wasn't interested in that. And,
Gotcha.
to your point, I don't hate kids. I actually like kids, but middle schoolers, I mean, if you're going to rate kids on a scale of who were the most fun to hang out with, I think middle school is probably the most difficult time. I remember for me, it was the worst time of my life. Like if you asked me to go back and replay a portion of it, that's part I probably wouldn't do.
No, that makes sense. And like I said, love kids, would not, and I always joke, I said, I love being the teacher of the teaching aspect, but I would not be do well within the, especially the structure of having to keep my mouth shut on many of the things that I don't like within the teaching or the educational system just wouldn't fit for me. So you kind of had that epiphany, said, hey, don't want it, this isn't the direction that I'm long-term going to be happy or want to go in that, so I'm going to shift gears. So as you kind of came to that understanding, kind of where did you go to next, or what was that kind of that next phase as far as, or kind of what you figured out?
Yeah. I think a lot of the early years of my life was less sort of running towards something I wanted and more running away from things that I didn't want. And that was the leaving school was just that. And I didn't really have a plan. And so I started going out realizing if I'm not going to be at school, I got to start paying back my student loans. I got to have income. So I started applying for jobs and I ended up getting a job at a restaurant. And I moved up really quickly and I really enjoyed the fast-paced nature of it. And it felt easy to connect with people and learn the business. So, and honestly, I think everyone in their sort of college years should be forced to work at a restaurant because just learning how to interact with people and how to deal with challenging situations of conflict, how to have empathy for people who are in service positions. I mean, all that was really, really great. And so I had a great time. I enjoyed life. I was able to save up enough doing that where I bought my first house right when I turned 21, which felt like a really awesome milestone for me. But it just got old. It got old when I was in my early 20s, and I was thinking, is this going to be my life? Working 60 hours a week, having a handful of days where I get home at 3:30 in the morning and then I'm sleeping in till 11 or 12. It just, I don't know. At some point, I felt like I'm ready to grow up, and this didn't feel like the kind of grown up I wanted to be.
So what, you make that, or you said that's, that's not what you want to be, is it, and that's
Yeah.
kind of, I'm still figuring out what I want to do when I grow up, and I don't know that I'll probably figure that out about the time I retire. But as you kind of, did or come to, that's not necessarily what you wanted to be as you're looking or farther into your career, kind of where did you figure out what you were going to do, or kind of where did you go from there?
I don't think I did. You mentioned this when you were telling my story up front. There wasn't some moment where I sat down and had deep reflection and said, you know what, Jeremy? Maybe you don't want to do this restaurant thing for a while. I think I just ran around to different opportunities around the country looking for something that was going to be more of a spark. And that moment with the assistant general manager where she pulled me aside and made me just feel small and like I needed to constrain myself, like that I needed to play a certain way in order to dampen down the impact that I was having. It was just so, I'd never felt so small in my life. And so again, it wasn't that I had some brilliant idea about what I wanted to do next. I just realized like I was pissed and I didn't want to be there anymore. So I quit. And I think intuitively I knew I was done with the restaurant business. I just really wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. And as I mentioned to you when we talked the first time, I went and got my real estate license, not because I had some grand visions of what I was going to do with a real estate license. I just happened to know a couple people who had done it and they had done pretty well. And like I said, I had bought my first house when I was 21. So I was technically a landlord because I had moved pretty soon after that and I didn't have enough equity to do anything other than rent it out. And so I thought I was this, I thought I was pretty badass. This 24-year-old kid who was a landlord. I thought maybe I could do this, more of this real estate investing stuff. So that was really the motivation. And that ended up opening the doors to a lot of things that eventually became my first business.
No, that makes sense. So, and I always have to laugh because there's I think it's Facebook or LinkedIn. I can't remember what I was seeing the other day when somebody's asking for local realtors in the area, and there was like a list of like we're in a small community where it's like 3,000 population of like 3,000, so relatively small, and there was like two or three hundred like lists of like two or three hundred realtors. I'm like,
Yeah.
there's almost as many realtors as houses for sale, and so it's one of those that it seems like as you kind of highlighted, it's not necessarily something that always everybody always or necessarily falls into intentionally, but it's one where you see that everybody else is doing it, and at least my experience, he says, okay, I can do if everybody else can do it, why can't I do it as well? And it sounds like kind of that was a direction where he said, hey, done some of this with real estate, renting out my own house. Why not? I could do it as well as anybody else. And it sounds like he kind of got into it. Now there was an evolution, I think, as you mentioned. And one of the interesting things that you mentioned is as you got into it, you got into kind of whether it was a business group or a mentorship group, or I think it was an investment group, is what you mentioned, and they provided some good guidance and books from that direction that set you on a good path. At the same time, they also ended up being a Ponzi scheme, and they ended up going in a different direction. And it was a good thing you weren't part of that group. But maybe walk us through a little bit of that iteration as far as once you decided to get into it, kind of the good and bad of that investment group, and also the iteration of kind of figuring out what was your niche or how you set yourself apart.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing you're alluding to is pretty soon after I got my real estate license, I met this group of investors. And it was really the first time in my life that I had had a relationship with entrepreneurs. Before that, I didn't grow up with anybody in my family who was entrepreneurs. I didn't have friends whose parents were entrepreneurs. And so it was my first exposure to it. And these guys were just total rah-rah for business and for investing. And they gave me, Rich Dad, Poor Dad and a bunch of other books, seven, habits of highly effective people. And I'm just soaking this stuff up because for me, I was somebody who used to love to read as a kid and then learned to not like it when I went to college and high school because you had to read all this garbage that wasn't that interesting. And this stuff really lit me up. This idea that there could be more for my life and something that I could invest in myself. So they kind of opened my eyes to other opportunities that were out there. And one of the things I noticed being brand new to real estate, one of the things they literally teach you when you're going through the training is be wary of working with real estate investors. And the whole point is you're going to spend a lot of time with these people. They're going to talk to 15 or 20 of you, and they're not going to work with any of you, right? They're just going to suck you for information and then go do whatever they're going to do, their deal on the side. And I remember hearing that and thinking, but what about the people that want to get into it? I mean, I get that that's maybe true for somebody who's already deep into real estate investing, but I just had this feeling that there was a lot of people out there that wanted to do more with their money. And I said, who's helping those people? I didn't see anything out there. And so it was sort of the first germ that started to plant its way in my brain of maybe there was a business opportunity here. And it really all crystallized for me. I had this situation over the summer. I'd been dating this gal, and we weren't really that into it. And she had gotten back from a wedding from one of her friends and sent me an email, said, hey, I think it's probably time for us to end it. And I sent her back an email that was like, yeah, you're probably right. But then I was like, you have that moment where something is ending, but you haven't taken the time to notice it. So there was like this letdown for me where I said, I just need to get out of town. So I literally called my friend Joe and I said, hey, if I flew out there, could you get your shifts covered for the weekend so we could just hang out? It was like a 4th of July weekend. And he said, yeah, let me call around and I'll call you back in like an hour. So he called around and called me back in an hour. And he said, yeah. So I booked a plane ticket to fly out the next day. And I spent the entire weekend with Joe and had a great time and ended up running into my ex-girlfriend while I was out there. And she and I spent an entire night just sitting outside, chatting, talking. And all of a sudden, this seed that was germinating in my mind started to bloom because she was one of the inspirations for me getting my real estate license. She had gotten her license when she was 19, and she was, making 60 or 70 grand a year at 19 and 20. She was like the richest person I knew because she was a really good salesperson. And I realized all of a sudden that the thing that had been holding me back from doing anything with this idea was that you had to have been in real estate for a couple years in order to get your broker's license. So even though I thought there was maybe something that could be built, I was like, oh, so it's going to take me a couple years to get to the point where I can get a broker's license and do this. And all of a sudden I'm sitting here having this conversation with Jill and thinking, well, she could do it. And so I talked to her, and I think it was 7 or 8 weeks later, she moved out to Seattle, Washington, started taking her broker's license test, and we opened a real estate brokerage a couple months after that. And I've now been married to Jill for 21 years. So it turned out all right.
Nope, that is does sound like it turns out all right and a good place to be. Now, one and maybe to follow up to that, and one of the things you mentioned is I think, and by all means, if I'm putting words in your mouth, correct me where I'm wrong, is that
Sure.
you started out kind of doing, I'll say in quotes, the typical real estate or kind of going down there where you're just buying and selling homes, helping people to get them on the market, and otherwise you're transactional, and then you shifted to doing a little bit more with retirement accounts or helping people to, and
Yeah.
I'm not by no means an expert in this area, but helping people to utilize their retirement accounts in order to or use those funds to invest in real estate or otherwise leverage that kind of accessibility. But how did you kind of come to that determination or go in that direction? And what was kind of the genesis for or shifting that focus?
Yeah. I never really spent much time helping people find homes that they were going to live in. That, that part of the job had never really connected for me. The part where I really lit up was helping people who wanted to do investment related projects. That's where it was intriguing for me when their motivation was trying to build something financially for themselves. So, what little business I had when I first started was coming from making those relationships with people who wanted to do that or were doing that and wanted my support. And so even when we opened the brokerage, the vast majority of the deals, at least that I was involved in, had to do with investment related stuff because I didn't like the part of the job that was just, coding people around and like, hey, is this the house you want to live in? Like that never was really my jam. But the investment stuff was interesting. It was something I thought I was helpful and good at in terms of helping people think about how it would come together and how you would model it out. And so I started building up this network of people in the investment community. And one of the people I knew said, hey, you got to meet this other guy. He's a young guy like you, pretty ambitious. I think you guys would like each other. And I think you both like Michael Jackson music. So you probably hit it off. And so I said, yeah, I'd be happy to meet him. So I went out and I met David, who has now been my business partner for 23 years. And he and I did hit it off. He's super smart, just a really great human. And we started doing some projects together. And it was on one of those projects that our eyes sort of opened for this other opportunity. So between David and I together, probably started three or four smaller businesses before we ever started what became Guidant Financial. And it was just things around, we had a raw land development project that we were building out. We had a company that was helping people with long-term, lease options. We had a bunch of little things that we were sort of poking around with. But on this raw land development deal, we ended up meeting with this group of attorneys to help us structure the fundraising for it because it was going to take some meaningful capital. And they said, hey, have you guys thought about using self-directed retirement funds for this project? And we said, what are you talking about? I mean, I'm a 25-year-old kid, but because I have these relationships and know these people in the investment community, I'm thinking, I hang out with these people all the time and nobody's talking about this. So this thing must not really exist. So I started asking a ton of questions and then went home that night and did a bunch of research. And I'm looking at this. I'm like, how do people not know about this? And so we went out to our network of people when we were fundraising, and we ended up getting about 2/3 of the funding commitments for this project through people who said, yes, I want to use my IRA funds for this. And so then, of course, they didn't know what they were doing. So we had to go figure out how to get all these accounts set up so these people could make this investment in our project. And by the time we got done with that project, we were thinking, actually, the real estate investment project was fine, but this other thing is way more interesting. This idea that you can use retirement funds to invest in things that you can have a little more control over, things other than stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Every person that we talked to about this seemed really intrigued and excited about it. And then what we found more and more as we were going through and helping people set these things up is it was just really convoluted. First of all, there were only two people at the time, two kinds of people at the time that helped people with this, and they were attorneys or bank custodians. And no offense, because I know I'm talking to an attorney on this podcast, Devin, but there's two groups of people that don't speak particularly good English as far as investors go, and those are bank custodians and attorneys, right? Um,
Absolutely.
and so we had so many frustrations trying to get these accounts set up and get them moved. And we thought to ourselves, there has to be a way to make this simpler, because we knew from the investor perspective, what they were trying to do. So we started the company with a how could we make it easier for people to make these kind of investments without all the headache and do it in a way where they can go and access these other types of investments that maybe have more compelling returns or better opportunities for control or things of that nature. And so that was really the foundation for what became Guidant Financial. Originally, we started out helping people use retirement funds to invest in all sorts of things. A lot of real estate based stuff, tax liens, foreclosures, but also businesses. And helping people use retirement funds to invest in a business, especially one that they're going to actively participate in, is a pretty tricky thing to do, right? It's possible and it's legal, but you have to jump through certain hoops, both when you set it up and on an ongoing compliance, basis. And so that came to dominate what we got really, really good at doing is helping those people set these things up and then manage and administer those accounts over time so that they keep all the great parts about the retirement account, right? Tax deferred or tax free, but instead of investing in Microsoft and Yahoo stock at the time, then it was invested in Devin Miller Inc. And they got to go out and buy franchises or acquire companies or, do a startup. I still, just the other day, I bought another 4 bottles of this dry fly bourbon. It's one of my favorite gifts to give out. I love to give gifts out to people that are from client businesses that we've helped start because they used an investment or retirement funds to do it. And now we've been at this for, gosh, what is it, 22 years now, about to be 23 years. We've helped almost 35,000 people become business owners. I thought when I started this business that I was going to do it for 3 or 4 years and then we were going to sell it for a few $1,000,000 and then I was going to go live on a beach for the rest of my life. And what I found in the process is that becoming a business owner has really changed who I am and how I think about my own agency and control over my life. And I am so grateful. I feel so lucky to have fallen into this because there wasn't some significant amount of intention that was put into it. I just got lucky that a few dominoes fell in the right way that I became a business owner. And I love that I get to work, all day, every day to help more people do that for themselves. Because, actually, you asked me the question earlier, Devin. You had asked, what was it about student teaching I didn't like? I think I just figured it out. What I didn't like about student teaching was that it's really annoying to try and teach someone that doesn't actually want to learn.
Uh,
And most
that
middle schoolers and the way that our school is set up is not set up so school is fun and kids are excited to come there and they want to learn. You are dragging them along, and that is miserable. But I love, love, love to help support and coach and educate people who want to grow and want to take more ownership of their lives. And that's what I get to do now. I just do it with adults instead of middle schoolers, which
probably works out well and suits the personality and the direction you want to be. So it sounds like it's been a good direction over a good extended period of time. So that's awesome. So well, with that, we've already reached the present day of the journey, and always a good time to transition to the 2 questions I always like to ask towards the end of each journey. So we'll jump to those now. So with that, the first question I'd like to ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What'd you learn from it?
there were many times during my journey where I got distracted by the next shiny thing. And I think one of the things I didn't appreciate, Devin, is that the very thing that makes people really good at a startup in the beginning can become their downfall later on. I was really good. I became really good at coming up with ideas and believing in them fully. But I then wanted to go start the new thing, right? Once the thing was up and running, it got kind of boring to sort of tweak at the dials and make it incrementally better. And so it was always on to the next thing. And so, I mean, if I look at how many businesses I've been a part of founding and buying and owning and where they have gone well and where they have not gone well, they have not gone well every time I've come from a place of just trying to build more for the sake of more and chasing the shiny next thing. So in 2000, would have been 2007. So Guidant grows like gangbusters for the first 3 or 4 years, right? It's almost getting to the point where it's like out of control because it's growing so fast and there's so much that needs to be put in place on the infrastructure that it was really kind of overwhelming. And so I got fixated on this idea I had for a problem that was upstream for many of the clients we were working with, which is how do you find these alternative investments? And I was like, there's not really any good spot or credible place you can go to do that. And so I fell in love with this product idea I had. I went full field of dreams, Devin. It was I'm going to build it, and they are going to come. And I spent probably $400,000 or $500,000 building a team, getting an office space, finding a technical co-founder, hiring a team of writers, and we built this whole thing to create this content engine for helping people find and filter through finding great alternative investments. And it was a shit show. It was a shit show because I built this thing without a specific customer. I wasn't talking to the customer about what was there. If I contrast it with what worked well about Guidant, with Guidant, we started with revenue out the door because we encountered it doing something else and then said, oh, we can do this. And so then we started offering to help other people with a service offering that we sort of evolved as we learned more about what they needed. So we were driving in revenue as we were learning what that business needed to look like to really help people and scale. This was the exact opposite. This was me spending a bunch of money based on my own hubris about what I thought made sense for the world. And it turns out the world didn't want it. And I wasn't smart enough to figure out at the time that there are probably a lot better ways for me to have tested that and figured out what the right product was before we spent a bunch of money.
No, and that's probably the issue, the quintessential entrepreneur or startup, person or faces in the sense that it is, a lot of the areas that are people find fun are the areas where you're getting to try out new ideas, new products, new inventions, new businesses, and that's where you drive a lot of the fun. And yet sometimes you get so caught up in the idea of the potential or or thinking it's going to be the next game changer that you don't always do the due diligence or the work to figure things out or to make, to do the things that may not be as fun but are necessary to set it up for success. So definitely an easy mistake to make, but always a great one to learn from. Second question now that I like to ask is, so now if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one rule of thumb that you'd recommend?
The one rule of thumb I'd recommend. I'm going to say something that's probably not going to be popular because people don't like this. Um, Create a set of cash flow projections and do them yourself, even if it's painful, even if it hurts you to go into Excel and figure it out. Because here's what I have learned every time I've had to build a cash flow projection for a business. It forces me to understand what the assumptions are that underpin the business model. And I don't know if you've ever built a cash flow projection, but when you start doing this, you realize, because you got to put in an assumption. Let's say it's for a food business. You realize you're building this financial model. Okay, how much is my food going to cost? So I need an assumption for that. And then you start going to fill that assumption in and you realize I have no idea what the food cost should be, right? So it exposes these knowledge gaps for you that then point you to where you need to go to look for that. And the other thing I've always found with a cash flow projection, even though you may have 20 assumptions or variables in it, there are always two or three that really move the needle far more than any others. And if you can figure that out before you start or buy your business, it is so much easier because you can eliminate all the noise and say, these are the three things that matter. It's my labor cost, it's the product price, and it's the client retention or whatever the things are. And it's like, okay, now I can really focus my energy on making sure I track that and understand it. Um, I like to tell people that if you want to be successful in business, build a crystal ball. And what I mean by that is the best way to predict the future is to measure it, right? There are the outcomes you need for your business. I promise you, there are things happening upstream that you can measure that will tell you what's going to happen with your business 2, 3, 4, 12 months from now. Cash flow projections are one of those things, right? Because when you have a projection and then you put your actuals in for month 2, you're going to see what happens. You're like, oh, wait a second. I thought I was going to have cash for 14 months and now I'm running out of cash at month 6. That's a problem.
No, I think that's definitely, it's not always the most fun or the most popular, but I think that's definitely a great rule of thumb and a great exercise. If nothing else, it highlights both the opportunities as well as sometimes the weaknesses, and slowing you down, and making sure that you have those things in place before you kind of charge off and go or chase the exciting things. So I think that's definitely a great rule of thumb. Well, now as we do wrap up towards the end of the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Well, it depends on what you're looking for. If you want to find out more about how to use retirement funds to invest in a business, the best place to go for that is guidantfinancial.com. That's GYDANT financial.com. You can find a whole bunch of free educational information there. That we put out in the world to help people who are going down this path of business ownership. If you just want to hang out and talk, or connect with me, you can do that on my website, which is jeremyames.com. I do a weekly newsletter. It's really focused on people who are aspiring business owners, because what I do every week is I go through a sort of thematic thing that people are struggling with, that are aspiring business owners are talking to me about, like, hey, how do I decide if I should do a franchise, a business acquisition, or a startup, as an example. And then I'll sort of drill into that with some specifics and some reflection questions and some tools and resources that people can access to really help them through that particular thing. And that's just kind of my personal mission. Sort of aligns with Guidant, because obviously if more people are going down the path of becoming business owners, there's potentially more customers that need what Guidant offers. But really, it's my sort of giving back for all the things that business ownership has given to me. That's the impact that I want to make in the world, is helping more people not so much get lucky like me, but do it in an intentional way.
No, that's definitely great ways to reach out to you. Encourage everybody to reach out, support a great business, or expand their network, make a new connection. If nothing else, make a new best friend. So with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you, the listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to inventiveunicorn.com, apply to be on the show. Couple more things as listeners. Make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review. Helps us to reach even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And along that note, if along your journey you ever need help with patents or trademarks or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
You bet. Thanks, Devin.
We plant, my friend. Dusty boots, but a heart of gold. Your story's waiting to be told. Inventive journey, here we go. Through highs and lows, we let it flow. The startups rise and small be shine. Your time is now, your stars align. Cowbell ring and feel the beat. Hustle hard, don't take a seat. Every step you're blazing trail. Inventive journey never fails. Inventive journey.